Hello there, welcome or welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi, my name is Samantha and this is my channel where I talk all about books. Anyway, today I'm coming to you with one of my favorite videos to make, and I'm going to be talking about my reading statistics for last year. So my reading statistics for 2022. I love to track my reading. I use Goodreads, Storygraph, and I also have my own reading tracker that I use because I just like to keep track of things in that way. I used to just like write things down, and I just think the spreadsheet is so much nicer. But this year I'm actually going to be switching it up, and I'm going to be using Deja's tracker from Deja's Book World. She created this tracker and it is beautiful. I love it so much, and I'm very grateful to her for making it because it has some things that mine is lacking. For example, hers has like a subgenre section, which is something that I found really annoying this year, is that I read a lot of books which covered two genres, and then to only categorize it in the one genre was really annoying because it's like, you know, it will say I only read 2 historical books, but really I read like 6 because some of them were like historical fantasy or historical like mystery. So I would put like fantasy or mystery as like the main category. So that's kind of annoying for me personally. I would prefer to have 2, like a genre and a subgenre, which is what Deja has. Anyway, I'm gonna link her video where she goes through the whole spreadsheet down below, and there's a link there to the spreadsheet which you can use, or you can also buy it on Etsy and support her channel. So whichever you want to do. But yeah, I thought I would talk about my reading statistics. So yeah, I'm just gonna screen record and talk about all the statistics that I've got going on. I might also bring in my Storygraph, but I think the Storygraph isn't quite as accurate because they don't include DNFs, whereas I do in my own personal reading. So yeah, I'll do both. The first thing on here is what type of book it was. So the categories are novels, poetry, nonfiction, novellas, anthologies, and graphic novels. I read 44 novels, which was 78.6% of my reading, so pretty substantial chunk. And then I read 2 poetry collections and 10 nonfiction books. So I would love to see a bigger percentage of nonfiction this year because I really love nonfiction. So I would like to read more of it for sure. I would also like to read a bit more poetry because I feel like I really like poetry, but I don't read it nearly enough. And then I didn't read any novellas, anthologies, or graphic novels because I'm not that into those sorts of categories. I'm actually reading an anthology right now. I don't love short stories, so it's Gleanings by Neal Shusterman, and I love Neal Shusterman's books, like especially the Side series, which this is short stories from that world. So even that, which should be like my perfect thing, I'm not really enjoying that much because I just don't like short stories. They're like, you know, they're never that memorable for me. I also have like my favorite book from each month, and yeah, it's not that important to be honest because I'm gonna talk about all my favorite books in another video coming up very soon. Moving on. So next we have my total number of books and pages read and all that. So I read a total of 56 books in the year, although that's not entirely true because I DNF'd quite a few books. So yeah, 56 is including the DNFs, whereas on Storygraph it will say 50 books because they don't include DNFs. So yeah, I guess I DNF'd 6 books in the year, which is pretty crazy. And the total amount of pages I read was 21,159, although that includes audiobooks because I don't actually track audio hours separately. I really should, but I just haven't worked out how to do that yet. So yeah, that's including audiobooks, and if it weren't for audiobooks, it would be a lot less. On average, I read 4.67 books every month. So that's like 4 2/3 of a book. Not a ton, but not too bad. And I had 12 rereads, which is quite a lot. The month that I read the highest number of books in was July, where I read 9. And then after that was March, when I read 7. And then my lowest read month was in May. I read 1 book, and it was a pretty short book as well. It was one of the George Nicholson books, so those are all like under 300 pages. So yeah, that was a pretty bad month in terms of reading. Anyway, moving on. So next is the representation in books. Most of the books I read actually had some sort of representation, which is good. I only had 30.4% of books which didn't have any representation of anything in particular. Next is my percentage of indie published versus traditionally published, and I only read 2 indie published books last year, and the other 54 were traditionally published because I really don't read that much indie. There's like one indie author who I read from time to time, which is Katie Wismer. Next we have the TBR type. I like to track where the books are coming from basically. So I have like physical TBR, library books, digital TBR, and then owned, which means that I've already owned it and read it, so it's a reread. It's not like from my physical TBR. And I also have a section for ARCs because I used to use NetGalley, but I actually deleted my NetGalley at the end of 2020, I want to say. It was a long time ago now. I haven't used NetGalley for quite a long time at this point. I am thinking about re-registering craving for it because I do miss it. 41.1% of the books that I read were from the library, although that's also including Scribd because I didn't have a separate way to track Scribd. Library or Scribd accounted for 41.1% of my reading, and then 21.4% were from my physical TBR, so that's pretty good. I did read quite a few books from my physical TBR, 21.4% from my digital TBR, and then 16.1% were from like my owned, so those were rereads. And then in terms of my genre breakdown, my two biggest genres were fantasy with 23.2%, and then after that was nonfiction with 19.6%. Nonfiction isn't really a genre, but that's just how I track it as a genre. I consider it more of a category, and then there are subgenres within nonfiction. I feel like I need like a whole different spreadsheet just for that because there's so many different topics in nonfiction, so I'm just gonna continue tracking it as like as a genre because it's just easier than like figuring out all the subgenres and stuff. Anyway, and then I also read quite a few mystery books, a few romance, quite a few contemporary, and then I had a few others here and there. My top were fantasy and nonfiction. Next, we'll move on to my ratings breakdown. So my average rating for the year was 3.59, which is not bad, but like it would be amazing if I could just have it to be like 4 or higher, because I feel like 3.5 is like not that great a rating, or okay, sorry, 3.59 is really not that great. That's like, to me, a 3.5 is like, I enjoyed this, but it's nowhere near a favorite. And then for me, 4 is like, this is really, really good, but still not a favorite. And then anything from like 4.5 plus is a favorite. I actually rated like a pretty big chunk of my books like 4 to 4.5 stars, and I also had a lot of 3 stars. I had 0 1 stars, so that's good. I had 1 1.5 stars, 3 2 stars, 4 2.5, 10 3, 7 3.5 stars, 11 4 stars, 10 4.5 stars, 3 5 stars, and 6 DNFs. We did have a lot of DNFs there, which was not great. And then to have only 3 5-star reads is really not that great, because for me, like, no, 5 star is like truly a favorite. Like 4.5 is like almost there, but not quite. And then 5 is like a true favorite. So it's kind of a shame that I only had 3. This year, I'm trying to focus more on quality over quantity and really find books that I truly love. And as you can see, like, I'm not really afraid to DNF. Like, I feel like I used to be like, I must finish it. But now, like, if I'm not enjoying it, I'm kind of ruthless. And I'm just like, you know, 100 pages in, you're out of here. Or even less sometimes. But yeah, I just think that life is too short and there are too many good books out there to continue reading books that are just like not it. Moving on to my format breakdown. So 46.4% of the books that I read were physical, so that's pretty good. That is quite a big percentage. I did borrow some physical books from the library, but mostly those were from my own shelves. And then I read 28.6% ebooks, so those would be a mix of ones that I own and then Scribd and Libby. And then 25% audiobooks, which again would be ones that I own and then Scribd or Libby. Finally, my last thing is the intended audience. So 27 of the books I read I would classify as adult books. That accounts for 48.2% of my reading last year. And then 5 of the books I read were new adult, so that's 8.9%. The other 43% basically were young adult. I read 24 young adult books last year, so that's definitely something I want to decrease. I want to definitely focus more on adult and new adult, because I feel like there's absolutely nothing wrong with reading young adult, but for me personally, I just find that I find it really difficult to connect to the characters, and I often find them really annoying nowadays. I'm in my mid-20s now. I'm 24, so yeah, I feel like their problems are just so different from mine. And like, for example, reading about kids in high school, I just find so boring these days. So yeah, the only exceptions are like fantasy, and then some of the mysteries I really enjoy. Like, for example, the Truly Devious series by Maureen Johnson. I'm loving that right now. So yeah, apart from like those specific things, I don't like young adult contemporary anymore. Like, I find it so boring. That is my spreadsheet. And then now if we have a quick look at my Storygraph. So as you can see, according to Storygraph, I didn't reach my reading goal of reading 52 books, but we know that I do count DNFs, like once I've reached a certain point. Obviously, if I DNF the book within like the first 10 pages, which has happened, I don't count that. But if I've read like at least 100 pages of a book, I'm gonna count it as read, because I feel like I've read enough of it to get an idea. So yeah, I personally do count that as read. I know that some people don't. I feel like that's your own decision. If you want to count it to count towards your goals, you go for it. If you don't, that's fine. Storygraph doesn't agree with me, but I agree with myself. Anyway, I randomly set my goal to 20,220 pages because I originally set it to 25,000 and then I was getting stressed that I wasn't going to reach it. So I set it to like 2022, but I added a 0 to the end of it and then I surpassed it. So that was a win for me. Now we can have a look at the moods. So I read mostly adventurous books, with 22 of my books being adventurous, and then I read 18 emotional, 15 mysterious, 12 lighthearted, 12 funny, and then the rest are, you know, a little bit insignificant. And then in terms of pace, I read mostly medium-paced books. I feel like I'm a medium-paced kind of gal. I love a fast-paced book as well, obviously, but I feel like, especially because I was really trying to like push for numbers more than like quality, I focused more on medium books. I would like to pick up some more slow-paced books as well. I think like there's nothing like a good slow burn, like a slow burn fantasy or a historical fiction which really makes you work for it, but it's worth it. I love that as well. So I want to, you know, not focus so much on like I have to read fast-paced or medium-paced books. I want to read, you know, whatever tickles my fancy at the time, you know? Similarly, in terms of page number, I read mostly between 300 and 499 pages. And then I read quite a few that were less than 300 pages. And then I only read 8 books that were over 500 pages. So I'd like to read more of those because sometimes you find some like really amazing ones, which are just like really freaking long. So yeah, I definitely want to push for maybe some longer books as well this year. And then my fiction nonfiction breakdown is 40 fiction books, 9 nonfiction according to this. And then genres, it says young adult, which I don't really count young adult as the genre, but what can you do? They do. And then fantasy, again, romance, actually they count pretty highly. Historical? Oh yeah, because I read some, like this is the good thing about Storygraph is it shows you in some ways a more accurate breakdown because they have like different genres. Like some books are counted as like 3 different genres. Format we've already done. My most read authors. So I reread a lot of books by Cassandra Clare last year. I read 7 books by her. I read 4 books by Maureen Johnson, which I'd never read any books by her before. And then I read 4 in one go because I loved her Truly Devious series. I read some Louise Renison because I reread the Jordan Nicholson series, but I'm going to stop rereading it because I'm bored of it. I read 2 Emily Henrys, 2 Frederick Bachman, 2 Libby Bray, and 2 Katie Wismer. And all the books I read were in English. I should definitely try and push myself to read some Spanish books. And then here's a pretty snazzy graph about my breakdown of books versus pages per month. As you can see, July was my highest month in both of these categories. And then in September, I only read 5 books, but I read a lot of pages actually. I think I read some pretty chunky books that month. Because yeah, that was like one of my lower months books-wise, but pages-wise, it was my second highest. So that's kind of cool. Star rating, they say it's 3.62 because I'm more specific on Storygraph. So some things I've like rounded down on my personal graph or rounded up. So yeah, those are all of my reading stats for 2022. Let me know if you have a video like this. I would love to watch it because I like looking at people's statistics. I think it's interesting. I love tracking my own. And don't forget to check out Deja's spreadsheet, which I'll link down below. Well, I'll link her video talking about it down below, and then you can get to it from there. But that is all that I have for this video, so I hope you liked it. If you did, please give a thumbs up. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe down below, and I will hopefully have another video up very soon. So I will see you then. Okay, bye!